Okay, I just needed to see. Now, what I did this morning was I read and then commented on Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. I want to do that again, just from my King James Version, Genesis chapter 6, 1 through 4. I cannot spend time on it. I just want to read it. I will not be able to comment. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, because we're going to build on that tonight, so you need to know what it says. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, had sexual relationships with them, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, hold on to those verses from the King James. Nancy, bring up the Bible that she uses here is the Living, Ken Taylor's translation, which he translated himself for his children. It became very popular. Listen to this from Taylor's translation called the Living, same verses. Now a population explosion took place upon the earth. It was at this time that beings from the spirit world looked upon the beautiful earth women and took any they desired to be their wives. Then Jehovah said, My spirit must not forever be disgraced in man. Wholly evil as he is, I will give him 120 years to mend his ways. In those days, and even after that, when the evil beings from the spirit world were sexually involved with human women, their children became giants, of whom so many legends are told. That's quite a translation, isn't it? Surely is. Kind of puts the cookies on the bottom shelf. So what did we establish? That the sons of God cast down after the rebellion, when Satan said, I would be like the Most High God, and a certain portion, we think about a third, of the angels went with him. And so they were cast down. God says, get out of here, and cast them down. Jesus said later on in his ministry that he saw Satan fall as lightning. You see, he actually saw that, and as the second person of the Godhead, he did see that. I'm getting a lot of feedback here. What's the problem? Anything you can do about it? Okay, we just think about it. If you come up with an anointed answer, do something. Yeah. Okay. We didn't have it this morning. So we know that these angels, these sons of God, were cast down. And it says here in Genesis chapter 6 that as they were called then the sons of God, they were cast down and they came into the daughters of men. Strangely enough, these angelic, or you'll have to call them supernatural, not supernatural in the same essence that God is supernatural, but they were supernatural because they were greater than natural. They came upon the natural women, and then they had children. Well, we talked about, well, what did our natural men think about that down here at the time? When the ladies, the fairest probably of them all, because it says that the sons of God saw that they were fair, maybe they only took the good-looking ones, we don't know. And they came in unto them, took them as wives, had sexual relationships and children with them. What did the natural men think of this, especially when the Nephilim were giants, not only good-looking, but big, you know? And if you're just a natural old fella, 5'8", you're not going to mess around with somebody like that. What did they think about it? We also brought up this idea, were the Nephilim beautiful themselves? We think so. We think as angelic beings, they did have a tremendous beauty, and they drew humans unto themselves. Was this then the beginning of homosexuality? Were the men then rejected, bitter, but beautifully ensconced in their eyes with the Nephilimic creatures, if they went to them and they had then sexual relationships, the beginning of homosexuality? If so, it would begin to answer the question of how that in Genesis 19, Sodom and Gomorrah, we have such a heavy homosexual context there. How did that happen so quickly between 6 Genesis and 19 Genesis, you see? All right. Now, I can't go any further into that. We'll have to just leave that for what it is right now and get these Of all the years I've been coming here, I've never said you must get the tapes, but I'm saying it now. You must get these. Nancy, would you take these, honey? Thank you, honey. You're a doll. Didn't have my glasses on, so it's a... Now, the title of the message here is The Flood and the Nephilim. You do know that the Lord says, my spirit shall not always strive with man, Genesis 6:3, and he's giving him 120 years to mend his ways, as Ken Taylor said, but he didn't mend his ways, and so he said, I'm going to judge you, and the judgment he brought about was the Noahic flood. So we're going to understand then what is happening with the Nephilim, these giants, these cast down, aborted ones from heaven, you see. What's going to happen with them in the flood? We talked this morning about the evil and how in the world would God come upon the earth with such terrible judgment if it was just plain old normal sin, Well, it wasn't plain old normal sin. It was nauseating sin. I think heavy sexual sin. That's why I'm convinced that homosexuality was involved there very strongly, you see. And it was not only with the human beings, it was with the superhuman beings, the Nephilim themselves, and their giant offspring. Well, the judgment came, but what happened when the flood came? By the way, tonight we're going to see some things about the flood, what happened, about the waters, where they came from, etc. It's going to amaze you, absolutely amaze you about this situation. Mostly you would think of the movie that you saw about the flood, where we had all the animals smelling up the boat, and we got Noah and his family in there, and the mooing of the cows, and the bleating of the sheep, and the oinking of the pigs, and so forth, and they were tossed around a little bit, and the rains came. Did you ever wonder how much rain would it have to come to cover all the mountains? Impossible. Meteorologically impossible. No way, Jose. But we're going to see that and see how it happened, and it's absolutely marvelous, and it's just one of those amazing things. And strangely enough, like I said this morning, as science goes on and prospers and discovers new things, it just confirms the Bible. And this is going to confirm many things of the Bible as we talk about it. What I'll have to do here is ask you to turn to Genesis chapter 7. I'll be reading from the King James Version. And I'll be reading, I have to read a pretty good text there, verse 2 through 24. I'll have to read that, and you follow along with me. I think what I will do before I read that, this may be the time to pass out those pages. So, ushers, would you help us out here? I don't want to wait until we get to where I'm ready to explain them and then stop for a couple of minutes to do it. I think that we should pass them out now. Now, as you get these, just get them and hold on to them until we come to the place that I want to explain them. You can look at them, but don't try to figure them all out. I don't care if you look at them, but you're going to have questions. And when I get ready to come to that part of the message, I'll explain what they are, and they will make a lot more sense with some explanation. Pictures are worth sometimes 1,000 words at least. We're going to change microphones. Does that sound different? It does sound different, doesn't it? I think I sound smarter on this, don't you think? Oh, at least lower. Oh, you're a good-looking group. I got a couple of minutes here to look around. Yes, there's a good-looking fellow and next to a good-looking girl. I bet they're happy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a Baptist. That's good. Uh-huh. Went past a Seventh-day Adventist church this morning, coming to church here. I told Nancy, I said, it looks so sad. There's nobody there. Well, if Seventh-day Adventists, they shouldn't be there, see? I have a lot of relatives who are Seventh-day Adventists. I like the Seventh-day Adventists. Their most prominent theologian, Dr. Samuele Bacchiocchi, is a dear friend of mine. Great mind. Super duper. Call him Brother Sam. Seventh-day Adventist. You know, Saturday is the Sabbath. This isn't the Sabbath. This is Sunday. So don't feel bad about them meeting on the Sabbath, on Saturday. That's okay. They're Seventh-day Baptists, too, you know. So Oh, that is anointed, isn't it? If you're a Seventh-day Baptist, that you're really right on. Especially if you get Spirit-filled. Oh, my. Of course, there are only 3 of those people in the whole world, but... All right. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 7. I'm going to start reading with verse 2. And of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Then I'll go to verse 4. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. Then I'm going to verse 7 and go through 11. And Noah went in, and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him into the ark, because of the waters of the flood, of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls and everything that creepeth upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Now to verse 13. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, and every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 by 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. And the waters prevailed, and were increased greatly upon the earth. That word greatly will come to mean something better than you think right now. And the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land, died. And every living substance was destroyed which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Now I want to ask some questions so we can answer them together. First question, Genesis 7:2, why were there more clean beasts put on the ark than unclean beasts? So they could what? So they could eat them. Well, that's close. They only sacrificed clean beasts. Of course, they ate the sacrifice. That's why I said that was close. But it wasn't Barbecue City like Austin, Texas. No, I mean, it was, they didn't sacrifice the unclean. So they had to have more. That was one reason. There may be other reasons, but that's enough for us to remember. Question number 2, why were some beasts unclean? What made them unclean? Now, I don't really want to get into a big talk about this, except to bring up the questions for later on. You can reflect on that. When we're going to talk about the creeping things later on this evening, I want you to know that they were unclean. And why were they unclean? I think there is a spiritual reason that they were unclean rather than a dietary reason. Now, I could really go, speaking of Seventh-day Adventists, I could really go deeply into this because Seventh-day Adventists don't like you to eat meat. They want to be vegetarians, you see. And a lot of people are that way, saying, well, you know, some meat like pork. A lot of people say pork isn't good for you, beef's okay, but pork isn't good for you, sheep or lamb is better, but pork isn't. Well, that isn't what the Bible says. The Apostle Paul was put forth with this question and this problem, and he says, for every creature of God is good, I'm quoting, and nothing to be refused if received with thanksgiving. Now, we're talking about what you can eat now. So I don't think it was a dietary thing that made the beasts unclean. I think it was a spiritual thing. You'll get a hint of that a little bit later. Genesis 7:4, question under that verse, was there anything to be left alive on the earth? No. It says that everything that was on the face of the earth died. On the face of the earth. Genesis 7:8. Here again we see the distinction between the clean beasts and the unclean beasts. Now listen as I exegete these words for you. The Hebrew word ramas, R-A-M-A-S. R-A-M-A-S. The Hebrew word ramas means to glide swiftly, to crawl. To glide swiftly, to crawl. And the Hebrew word ramas is that word that is expressed in the King James by the word creeping or creepeth. Everything that creepeth, ramas, to glide swiftly, to crawl. Now there is a sister word, actually the same root, because in Paleo-Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, there were no vowels, only consonants. The sister word is not ramas, but remes, R-E-M-E-S. If you take away the A's and take away the E's, you've got R-M-S, same word. Not until the Masoretes of the 10th century, this side of Christ, do we have the vowels put into the Hebrew language, you see. So really it is the very same root. And so when we're talking about creeping things, we're talking about ramas or remes. And when remes is used, it usually means a reptile, creeping animal, a reptile. And what I want you to see right here is every time that we see the word creeping or creepeth here in this ark context, and we see it 10 times, it always uses ramas or remes. I want you to see the serpentine relationship. We're going to go into that a little, but I want you to see that. Creepeth. For instance, in the ark context here, in 7 and 8 of Genesis, we're going to see the word creeping or creepeth used 10 times. Now what's interesting is that Noah's family is only referred to 4 times. Does this seem to be an overemphasis? If God says it once, it's important. Twice, it's really important. 10 times, you better listen. What is he talking about? Is this a flag to draw attention to these creeping things? Yeah, I think so. I think so. Would these creeping things be considered as clean or unclean? I believe we can safely say unclean. How do these creeping things compare with the serpent of Genesis 3:14? Now, Genesis 3:14, that's in the garden, Adam and Eve, remember? It says, "And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go," creepeth. "And dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life." There's the relationship right there. Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. Now, I know I'm going a little fast, but we have to. Chapter 7 and 11, question. What are all the fountains of the great deep? We're going to find out. We're going to find out. I just wanted to bring up the question. Next question. What are the windows of heaven that were opened? We're going to find that out tonight, too. That one really is a killer diller. You'll love that. You'll come up and give me a kiss afterwards just for showing it to you. What are the windows of heaven that were opened? There's an interesting verb comparison here. The fountains of the great deep were broken up, while the windows of heaven were opened. Now just kind of think on that a little bit. We're going to go on. We'll get to it later on. I just wanted to introduce it so you'd start to think about it just a smidgen. Genesis 7:14. The creeping animals are mentioned again. It is eye-catching when it is observed that both Ramos and Remes are used close together in the same verse. The word creeping is Remes, and creepeth is Ramos. There's no doubt that the author is using these words as interchangeable synonyms and is doing so for emphasis. Why? He's emphasizing the creeping things. What did the flood come for? Judgment. A lot of people have said judgment for man. Well, undoubtedly it was judgment for man, but it was judgment for the Nephilim as well. Not only that, it was judgment for the earth. The earth was cursed also. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. What's important about this phrase? It was lift up above the earth. It was lift up above the earth. What was to be judged? The earth, the dry land, those that were on the dry land, all life that was involved with the dry land, earth, was the target for judgment. I'm pushing that on purpose because of what I have to say now. It was the earth, the dry land, that was targeted for judgment, and as the ark was lifted up with the waters, it was lifted up from the judgment, or the thing that was judged. What was the death? What was the judgment on the earth was the life and the redemption of the ark. And the ark was not left on the dry land. What was between the ark and the dry land? The water. Was God judging the water? No. The fish were in the water, not in the ark. Glory. Well, from Genesis chapter 7, verses 18 and 20, or through 20, we see that these verses progressively enhance and magnify 7:17. As the waters prevailed and increased greatly, were those in the ark in more danger or less? Less. They got further from the earth. The water was redemption for them. What does it mean in 7:18 where it says, and the ark went upon the face of the waters? Upon the face of the waters. Upon the face of the waters. This is the same wording as found in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. Listen, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, the waters. And the Spirit of God, Ruach, wind, moved upon the face of the waters. What are the implications here? Oh, you're going to get some good stuff here. Was there a worldwide flood before Noah's flood? Let's go to Genesis chapter 1 and find out. Take your Bible, turn to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to look at verses 2, 6, 7, 9, and 10. Genesis chapter 1, starting with verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, that's the waters, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. 6, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. This is a big part of our lesson tonight, so I'm really pushing this. Let me read it again. Usually we just read it over and don't know what we've read. God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. Verse 9, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. Ooh. You mean at the creation chapter, creation time? Before we're talking about things being created, like man and animals and stuff, that we had water all over the earth, covering everything, the deep, and then we had the separation of the waters? In a little bit, you're going to see just how much water was separated. You mean it covered everything? Worldwide flood? Ooh. Did you ever wonder how come the Bible started off and says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth? That sounds great. But the next verse kind of throws you. And the earth was without form and void. Hold the phone. How could God create the earth without form and void? How can you create something without a form? How can you create something void? Means desolate, nothing. We're talking about judgment time. There was a judgment time, a chaos time here before man was created. Man was not the original creation here. There was a pre-Adamic creation. A lot of theologians think there was a pre-Adamic race. I'm absolutely convinced that was dinosaur time. Now we know, if you can forget the Bible, just study dinosaurs and the great cataclysm that took care of the dinosaurs. All science comes in and tells us all about this, that they were destroyed and destroyed quickly. They were so big, they ruled the earth, as it were, and they were destroyed. There was a destruction. And the impact theory from the great Dr. Alvarez, University of California, Berkeley, great school, great doctor, great team, says that there was something from outer space, some kind of comet or world or something that hit the earth at this time, and it caused great fires. Probably a third of the earth was burnt up. Sounds like Revelation. That happens in Revelation. And there was so much smoke and so much dust and so forth that it caused what we call now a nuclear winter. That the dinosaurs, which weren't killed by the impact, were killed by the cold, you see. And we have dinosaurs with grass in their mouth, you know, mammoths, etc. So we know that there was this impact of some kind. There was some kind of judgment here. And the first flood was the maybe the aftermath, the manifestation of that first judgment, not Noah's flood. Now, to kind of put that into perspective, you got to go to the New Testament. Turn to 2 Peter chapter 3, would you please? 2 Peter chapter 3. We're going to look at beginning with verse 4 and go through verse 7. 2 Peter chapter 3, starting with verse 4. The apostle doing the talking here, talking about the last days and scoffers. Verse 4 says, "And saying," these scoffers are saying, "Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation." Nothing has changed since creation day, the scoffers are saying. Verse 5, "For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water." We're talking Genesis 1 here, not Genesis 6 and 7. "Whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished." This isn't Noah's time. Verse 7, "But the heavens and the earth, which are now," see the ones that are now, after the flood, after Noah's flood, "by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire." See, this earth is going to be destroyed by fire, this post-diluvian earth. "Reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men." Now, I'm going to throw in verse 8 here, because when you're talking about creation, you're always talking about this business of how long did it take for all this stuff to happen. Because a lot of folks think it was a 24-hour day for each creation day. A lot of theologians think that. Some theologians think that this verse here I'm going to read to you comes into play, and it was much longer earth time than that. And look what the verse says. "But, beloved," verse 8, "be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." Interesting that that would be put in the context of the flood in Genesis chapter 1. Very, very interesting. If you know anything about chronologies and dating, carbon dating, etc., you know that the traditional Christian dating system of Ussher or Calmet or Hale or any of the other Christians doesn't take into consideration some of the old things that we know were older than that. We know they were older than that. But they tried to get it from the Bible. The Bible is not a book of chronology. The Bible has some chronologies, and where it speaks of chronology, it's absolutely true, but it was never meant to be from the beginning to the ending a calendar. Never. In fact, if you want an interesting time, just try to discover how long a year is. There are 3 different kinds of years in the Bible. There's the lunar year, 354 days a year. There's the solar year, 365 plus days a year. Then there's the prophetic year, 360. And sometimes they're intermixed. We have the solar year now, that's what you're used to, but most of history they had the lunar year. The Muslims still have the lunar year. So the Bible isn't a calendar. So don't let that throw you. At the back of the Bible, they like to sell Bibles by putting in chronologies and everything else, maps they can find. I want to get a Bible that has a map of Southern California in it because that's where I live. Probably someday we'll have a Southern California Bible, you know. But please understand that there is a chronological problem there. As I said this morning, I was taught when I was in school that Egypt was the oldest civilization. I know better now. I got a couple of degrees in history and been reading a lot since then. Found out that Egypt is not the oldest at all, but Sumer is, S-U-M-E-R. We'll get into some Sumer tonight. It predated Egypt. Sumer was the first civilization. Sumer was a marvelous, fantastic, almost miraculous civilization. Now remember, it was the first civilization. Remember that it was on the Shinar plain, the Babylonian plain between the Tigris and Euphrates. Mesopotamia, middle, Potomas, Potamia river, middle of the rivers. What's so interesting is that the Sumerian civilization, the oldest one, wasn't a bunch of cavemen. It was an instant civilization of art, writing, knowledge. The knowledge they had, and you'll see it in a moment when we talk about the heavens, was beyond all belief. They knew of the planet Pluto when you can't see it with your eyes. They didn't have a telescope. They had all these wonderful technical things in Sumer that later on were taken by the next civilization, the Akkadians, the first Semitic civilization, then by Babylon I, then Assyria and Babylon II, Persia after that. Woo! Even all the way back, you've heard in mathematics, you've taken algebra, and I'm sure you heard in algebra that the term concept of zero came from the Arabs, the Muslims. Not so. No, they stole it years and years before they were ever Muslims. They were still Arabs, but they stole it from the Chaldeans. Now, the Chaldeans were the great group of people that we usually call the Babylonians. There was really no such thing as the Babylonians. That was just a name of a city, and just like, say, New Yorkers. What's New Yorker mean? You know, it can mean this and that and so forth. You can be Portuguese, you can be Puerto Rican, you can be black, you can be white, you can be Chinese in New York, and you're a New Yorker. Well, the Chaldeans were a great part of this Babylonian civilization. But we find out that this came from Zoroaster. Don't have time to get into that. We'll try to get that next year when we come back. Very, very interesting. Has to do with the god pantheons. You'll see immediately that these Sumerians, this first culture, this first civilization was instant. How do you have instant culture? Only by having the Nephilim come down with all of this stuff. And what's so interesting, and we're going to see it in a moment in our little graphic that I gave you, the planets that come out from the sun, we're going to see in the Sumerian accounts, antedating the biblical accounts, that not only did they know about these planets, they knew them 1, 2, 3, 4, starting with the outside or the farthest one. Like somebody had just flown in. These Nephilim, the Sumerians called them Anunnaki. That was their language. Nephilim, that's what the Hebrew calls them. Nephilim, that's what we call them. Same. Glory. Well, this flood that we have here in Genesis chapter 1. If there was a deep flood of water during the time of creation, and the same circumstances repeated for the Noahic judgment, is there a connection? Yes, there is. There's a connection of judgment. Do you think that maybe the sons of God angels, those Nephilim, were cast down during this first judgment in Genesis chapter 1? Because they were here. They were around when Adam and his young ladies came around. Was the purpose of the Noahic flood a brand new beginning, a kind of old things are passed away and all things become new situation? Sure looks that way, doesn't it? Let's talk about the windows of heaven. Ooh, the windows of heaven. Yep, this is the time. I want you to have handy your little sheet that you were passed out. We're going to get to it in a second, but just get it handy. The windows of heaven that opened for the flood have always intrigued Bible scholars. Some have suggested that this is a metaphoric phrase used to describe the great rain that fell. Yet I don't think it's a miracle at all, or rather a metaphor at all. It's a miracle, all right. I don't think this opinion is anything but arbitrary, and it doesn't seem to harmonize with the very literal tenor of the text. It really appears to be a straight, simple account of what happened, albeit in the limited phraseology of ancient man. The story begins in Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, saying, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, 'Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters.'" Now you just tell me how you can explain that to a Sunday school class of first graders. What do you think the firmament is? Well, you were taught that you look up outside on a nice clear summer evening and there are the stars. That's the firmament. Okay, get all those stars and so forth down into the waters, in the midst of the waters, and divide the waters with that firmament. Ugh. Very difficult. Or is it? Or is it? The word firmament, here in the King James, is used 4 times and is always used with waters and heaven. Used 4 times, is always used with waters and heaven. It is so very interesting to consider. There was a firmament in the midst of the waters, and it divided the waters from the waters. Surely this is referring to the windows of heaven spoken of in chapter 7 and verse 11. However, this doesn't explain the watery firmament or why there were waters above the firmament and below the firmament. Now, I'm going to make this as simple and direct as I can, but listen very closely. The Hebrew word firmament is rakia. Now, you have that on the sheet that I gave you. It literally means a hammered out bracelet. Rakia means a hammered out bracelet. Then God called the rakia, the firmament, he called it shamayim. Shamayim. What's shamayim mean? Heaven. He called the firmament heaven. Shamayim. The 2 roots of this word for heaven mean literally where the waters were. A Sumerian story tells us, now let me stop here, refresh you again, I did this a little bit this morning, that we have so much truth from this first civilization, this civilization of Sumer, so much truth that not only parallels, it antedates the biblical truth. Don't let that bother you. Don't feel that God didn't get to it first. God made the Sumerian firmament and the Sumerians. For too long, we as knee-jerk fundamentalistic Christians have kicked out science just because we figured that some of those scientists can't be saved, and they say, well, there is no God. Hold the phone. Doesn't make any difference what scientists think. It's what God did. If there's a black hole, he made it. If there's a light year, he made it. There's a firmament, whether it's Sumerian in their cuneiform tablets reported before Genesis was written, God made the whole shooting match, including the clay that went in the cuneiform tablets. Don't let that be a competition for you. Don't let that be a problem for you. Back to our piece of paper that you have in your hand here. Sumerian story tells us of a collision of a planet called in the Sumerian tongue Tiamat, with satellites of an invader from outer space called Nibiru. The Babylonians renamed Nibiru Marduk. I'll just simply say right here that the Babylonians made their chief god Marduk. Later on, we're going to see that it was deified Nimrod who was Marduk down here, but they named it after the story of the heavens always. And do you understand this? That the god pantheons, no matter what civilization it is, Mayan, Aztec, Greek, Roman, Sumerian, Babylonian, no matter, the god pantheons, that because they had more than one god, the god pantheons always had a connection with celestial stars, planets, etc., creations. Always. If you just think about that, if you're like me, you always say, well, why? Well, if this stuff came from up there, down here, through the Nephilim to start with, there's a good reason. And if these Nephilim are telling them, yeah, there's a planet out there you can't see, a little dinky thing from here is Pluto. It's pretty good size, actually, when you pass it and come in. So when we talk about this Sumerian story right here, remember that this is the report of what they were told by the Anunnaki, by the Nephilim. We don't have it in the Bible, but hey, there's a lot of stuff that's not in the Bible. There's a lot of stuff that we have and believe in that's not in the Bible. I love trousers. They're not in the Bible. You know, on and on and on. Most of the stuff we do in church today isn't in the Bible. Call to worship's not in the Bible. Sunday school's not in the Bible. Potluck's not in the Bible. Those chairs you're sitting on aren't in the Bible. The pulpit's not in the Bible. The mic's not in the Bible. You see what I'm saying? Let's just don't get too confused here. When the Sumerians now are talking about this planet called Tiamat, and it was struck by an invader from, quote, outer space, and the Babylonians called this invader Marduk. The Sumerians called it Nibiru. Well, when it was struck, Tiamat was split in two. Now, if you look down to the graphic on the left-hand side, you can see what's happening there. Tiamat was split in two. One half became our Earth and our moon. Stopping here long enough to tell you that most scientists agree that our moon came off of our Earth. Now, don't let the creation story in Genesis circumscribe your imagination. Don't think that God just sat here and says, I want there to be an Earth, boom, good. I want there to be a moon, boom, good. I want there to be a sun, boom, good. Listen, if you're going to read through the Old Testament and end up in Revelation, you're going to find out that God's got all these things whizzing all over the place, running into one another, and the sun turning into blackness, and the moon into blood, and on and on and on and on and on. I mean, he's God of the intergalactic processes, isn't he? And so this kind of thing very well could have happened. We don't care whether it happened or not. That's what the Sumerians said. As long as it doesn't contradict the Bible, it doesn't bother us. The other half of Tiamat, which wasn't the earth and the moon, was broken into bits and pieces that were hammered together to become a bracelet in the heavens. Now that's what firmament means. Ooh, rakia, firmament, literally means in Hebrew a hammered out bracelet. The other half of Tiamat was broken into bits and pieces that were hammered together to become a bracelet in the heavens. This bracelet is what we call the asteroid belt. Now see what the Sumerian story says. Quote, locking the pieces together as watchmen, he stationed them, ... He bent Tiamat's tail to form the great band as a bracelet. Now, look to the picture at the right where you have the sun in the upper left-hand corner. Then you have the planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Earth is the third from the sun, and you can see that little dot, which means moon. By the way, it's got not only the names that we have for them, like Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, etc., but it's got the Sumerian names too. They named them long before we did. And you will notice that after Mars, we have all those little dots there. I put a little wiggly line there. That's the asteroid belt. And the asteroid belt separates the first 4 planets from the outside 5 planets. Ooh. It separates. Now, Zecharia Sitchin, in his book, The 12th Planet, and he just simply did the work on the Sumerian tablets, and the Sumerians said that this 12th planet, this big thing they called Nibiru, later on Marduk, it invaded our system. And when it invaded our system, this Tiamat, this planet that was in our system, was broken in pieces for one half of it, and the Earth and our moon came from the other half. Now, could that be relegated and related to that first judgment in Genesis chapter 1? Yes, it could. If you want a good explanation of void, Genesis 1, that's a good explanation right there. Some judgment. Well, where did the Sumerians get this idea of this planet? Well, they talk about this planet, Nibiru, later called Marduk, and they said it came into being, and our Earth and moon came from it, and the asteroid belt, the pieces out there beyond Mars came, and then it came through. It was big and monstrous and strong. It came through and just smattered and shattered, and then it kept on going around the sun and went back out. And the Sumerian tablets tell us that the thing does it every 23,000 years. Well, we haven't checked it out recently. But that's what they said, you see. Now, in his book, The 12th Planet, Zecharia Sitchin says, "Thus did the invader that came from outer space become the 12th member of the solar system." Remember, we're counting the sun and the moon and the invader from outer space, because you're used to 9 planets, remember? It made up of the sun in the center. Now, the Sumerians knew this without any kind of help from telescopes. His companion Mercury next to the sun, the 3 olden pairs, Venus and Mars, you see, there with Mercury, Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus and Neptune, the Earth and the moon, and the remains of the great Tiamat, though now in a new position, and the newly independent Pluto. Looked like Pluto was following things around and finally got up there and stayed. And the planet that put it all into its final shape, Nibiru or Marduk. That's why they named, we'll see later on, Nimrod, named Marduk the chief god of Babylon. And all the main pagan deities, male main pagan deities, that sprang forth from subsequent cultures, sprang forth from the Babylonian Marduk. The story of creation and later the flood, as told in the Bible and in earlier Sumerian history, has always been a theodicy. These two stories and God were wrapped in the same package. As this package was unwrapped, its governmental and scientific principles were recognized and applied. Talking about a kingdom here now. To the Sumerians, the Nephilim, Anunnaki, were godlike not only in their appearance, as they were in Genesis 6, but also in their advanced knowledge of things earthly and things heavenly. The ancient tablets tell us of things, some of which are only now being confirmed and proven. This is especially true in the order of science and of the cosmic realm. The heavens were the realms of the gods. The chief god and all his sub-gods were planetary personages. That is, they were celestial counterparts to the established deities. The Anunnaki, the Nephilim, for the Sumerians, according to the Sumerian accounts, came from the heavens to earth in a spectacular eruption. Got to go back to Genesis 1 for that. The very advanced civilization of Sumer, according to the Sumerians, came from the Anunnaki Nephilim. We should note here that Nephilim comes from the Hebrew through the Bible, while Anunnaki is even earlier and comes from classical Sumerian. That's where the word comes from. It means, Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Nephilim means cast down or aborted. Anunnaki means those who from heaven to earth came. The Bible speaks of the Anakim. Deuteronomy 9:2 is a good reference there. The Bible speaks of the Anakim as giants in the land. Well, don't you know that Anunnaki and Anakim, same root? Same root. These two words, of course, are from the same source.
If the Sumerians confessed that all of their science and knowledge, both of heaven and earth, came from those who came down from heaven, then a great mystery could be solved. The mystery is, how could a civilization erupt out of nowhere and nothing, instantly exhibiting an advanced, even classic culture? The first civilization, the first language, the first laws, the first arts and sciences, all these were from instant Sumer. The great civilization of Egypt borrowed all these things. It should not surprise us too much then to find that Sumer gave us the first flood account. Talking about Noah's flood. Well, before the book of Genesis was written, the Sumerian account was written down. Don't let that bother you. God controlled all that. We should remind ourselves strongly here that this is not a different or competitive story of Noah's flood, but indeed is the same flood. One story, the Bible, is a Hebrew redacted text, while the other is an earlier Sumerian account done with Sumerian names and languages. In fact, much of the flood story is almost word for word with the Sumerian and the Hebrew of Genesis. It's good to see the works of God coming through other, less familiar eyes, isn't it? Got more than just a Hebrew report on it. Other people saw these things. Other people were involved in these things, you see. It's good to have other folks talk about it. We've got to remind ourselves that there's only one true God, only one everlasting God, who's the source and design of all that actually happened in the cosmos. God showed himself through his creation and judgment to all who were present at each event. This would apply to shooting comets and the great flood as well. Sitchin concludes saying, the Hebrews followed suit, preaching monotheism and recognizing, based on Sumerian scientific knowledge, the universality of God. The Hebrews were aware that the deity who could speak to Abraham and Moses and the celestial Lord, whom the Sumerians called Nibiru, were not one and the same scientifically, although all were part of a universal, everlasting, and omnipresent God, Elohim. Elohim. When the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, came down into Sumer, they, of course, were worshipped as gods. They were godlike as far as these Sumerians were concerned. Probably their beauty, their size, their great technology, their abilities, their administrative abilities to start a kingdom, and we're going to see later on in our studies, not tonight, that the first kingdom was with Nimrod. First time kingdom's ever mentioned. Nimrod was the center. Nimrod comes from the Hebrew word marad, which means rebel or rebel. Interesting that Nimrod was named after the sinful action of the fallen angels, rebellion. Very, very interesting. But let's return to the mystery of the divided waters. Now, I'm going to read this to you. It'll get through quicker rather than me talk about it. I'll take 10 times as long to talk about it. Let's return to the mystery of the divided waters. Waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. Genesis 1:7. We all know that the earth is a watery planet and perhaps is the answer to the waters under the firmament. Yet this leaves us with the source of the waters which were above the firmament. Let's remember that the asteroid belt, I haven't forgotten your picture, we'll get back to it. The firmament rakia, a hammered out bracelet, divides the inner or lower planets, the first four from the sun, from the outer or higher planets in our solar system. We should remind ourselves again that the word translated heaven, and God called the firmament heaven, in Genesis 1:8 is shamayim, which literally translates where the waters were. This gives us the idea that there was, or perhaps still is, water on one or more of the outer planets, those above the firmament. Now, long-held conventional wisdom has stubbornly taught us here on Earth that only Earth has any water in our planetary system. I heard a preacher say one time, no planet, nothing out beyond the earth has one single solitary drop of water. Well, fundamentalists have been wrong for a long time, and I've been a fundamentalist for a long time, so I know wherever I speak. But what science say? The Voyager 2 flyby of Uranus in 1986 corrected that notion when it was discovered that Uranus and her moons had ice in their composition. Neptune likewise was thought to be, quote, watery. Well, how about Saturn and Jupiter? Saturn is a monstrously large gaseous giant whose core has not been penetrated as yet. However, Saturn's rings and moons are now known to be in large part of water ice and maybe even liquid water. The unmanned spacecraft Pioneer 11 in 1979 that showed us that the many, far more than traditionally thought, rings around Jupiter, or Saturn rather, and ringlets were of icy material in the form of ice chunks and snowflake-like particles. It was actually described as a, quote, carousel of bright, icy particles. But when Voyager 1 and 2 flew by in 1980 and 81, one technician exclaimed, quote, we are seeing a sea of sparkling ice. The ice chunks were now seen to be as large as boulders and big houses. That's a quote. The scientists of JPL said that the ice had at one time been liquid water. Saturn's inner moons and outer moons were coated with ice. Iaptis, which is one of the moons, was discovered to be primarily, quote, a ball of ice with rock in its center. Jupiter was also investigated by Pioneer 10 and 11, as well as Voyager 1 and 2. The result were much the same as Saturn. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, is fascinating. A close look by Voyager 2 revealed a layer of mushy water under the cracked surface. David Reynolds and Stephen Squires of NASA's Ames Research Center suggested that under Europa's ice sheet there might exist warmer oases of liquid water that could contain and sustain living organisms. It is now believed that Europa has an ice covering several miles thick, quote, overlaying an ocean of liquid water up to 30 miles deep, kept from freezing by radioactive decay and the friction of tidal forces. Ganymede, Jupiter's largest moon, is covered with water ice mixed with rock. It is thought to be made up almost entirely of water ice with an inner ocean of liquid water near its core. Callisto, another Jupiter moon, also has an icy crust, covering mush and liquid water around a rocky core. It is estimated that Callisto is more than 50% water. Indeed, there has been and is waters above the firmament. There must have been enough water and ice above the firmament for a dozen floods. The opening of the windows of heaven had to be a cosmic storm of unimagined violence and magnitude. Been scientifically proven, I think I alluded to this before, there's no way to get enough rain to cover the earth because there's not that much water to cover the earth. On later studies, we'll get into exactly what happened. I want you to know right now that the firmament divided the waters from the waters above and the waters below. And the waters above were those watery planets out there that rained down oceans of water. Waters below probably was the ocean or the seas down here. And the ocean floors bubbled and pushed forth, causing new mountain ranges, etc. I don't know whether I'm going to have time while we're here this time. Maybe 2 or 3 lessons shy of having enough days. But we need to tell you about Pangaea. We need to tell you about the unified supercontinent. That when God created our earth, he didn't create South America just below Central America, just below North America, and Africa over there by itself. No. It was all one. And the Bible says about the man Peleg, P-E-L-E-G, they called him Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. And the Hebrew shows that it was the earth, the gay, the ground, not the people. Very, very interesting. Earthquakes, etc. Continental drift. They're still drifting. Very, very interesting. Got good graphics on that, by the way. Well, the waters which were under the firmament probably came from the earth itself. How this could have happened leads us to some very interesting speculation and surmises. The connection of the flood to the last ice age is a possible explanation. Sitchin explains this. He says, unusual pestilences affecting man and beast and a severe drought preceded the ordeal by water. That would be in Lamech's time, Noah's father. These phenomena could be accounted for only by major climatic changes. Such changes have been associated in Earth's past with the recurring ice ages and interglacial stages that had dominated Earth's immediate past. Reducing precipitation, falling sea and lake levels, and the drying up of subterranean water sources have been the hallmarks of an approaching ice age. Since the deluge that abruptly ended those conditions was followed by the Sumerian civilization and our own present post-glacial age, the glaciation in question could only have been the last one. Our conclusion is that the events of the deluge relate to Earth's last ice age and its catastrophic ending. End of ice age. Could that have something to do with void in Genesis 1, 2? Preceding the great flood? Drilling into the Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets, scientists have been able to measure the oxygen trapped in the various layers and to judge from that the climate that prevailed millennia ago. Core samples from the bottoms of the seas, such as the Gulf of Mexico, measuring the proliferation of dwindling of marine life, likewise enable them to estimate temperatures in ages past. Based on such findings, scientists are now certain that the last ice age began some 75,000 years ago and underwent a mini-warming some 40,000 years ago. Circa 38,000 years ago, a harsher, colder, and drier period ensued. And then about 13,000 years ago, the ice age abruptly ended and our present mild climate was ushered in. Well, putting the biblical and Sumerian accounts together, we see the cursing of the earth that came into its fullness at the time of Lamech, Noah's father. The social, climatic, geologic, and spiritual conditions had degenerated to such an extent that something had to be done. Now, this is hinted at in Genesis chapter 5 and verse 29, where it says, he called his name Noah, that is Lamech, called his son Noah, saying, quote, this same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. The Hebrew word used there for comfort is the word naham, which means to breathe strongly, to sigh, by implication to be sorry, to pity, to avenge, comfort. The word Noah is Noach. It means rest or quiet. Doesn't mean flood. The ground was to rest from all its frenetic evil that was generated from the curse. And look at Lamech. Lamech was 777 years old when he died, signifying the perfect completion of God's patience of the disorder and evil upon the earth. Noah was born to bring in God's righteous judgment on the whole earth. The climatic changes in Lamech's and then Noah's time must have been severe. For Noah to mean rest and quiet leads us to think that the flood of judgment was not only meant to destroy evil man, but also cursed and out of control earth as well. Before this time, there were ice ages, perhaps judgments in themselves. The last ice age abruptly collapsed about 13,000 years ago. However, there was nothing more abrupt and climatically catastrophic than the flood. Is there a connection here? What could have caused the climate to change so chaotically quick? Dr. John T. Holland of the University of Maine hypothesized that, I quote, the Antarctic ice sheet periodically breaks loose and slips into the sea, creating an abrupt and enormous tidal wave. This hypothesis, accepted and elaborated on by others, suggests that as the ice sheet grew thicker and thicker, it not only trapped more of Earth's heat beneath the ice sheet, but also created, by pressure and friction, a slushy, slippery layer at its bottom, acting as a lubricant between the thick ice sheet above and the solid Earth below. This slushy layer sooner or later caused the ice sheet to slide into the surrounding ocean. Dr. Holland calculated that if only half the present ice sheet of Antarctica, today's present ice sheet, which is on the average more than a mile in thickness, were to slip into the southern seas, the immense tidal wave that would follow would raise the level of all the seas around the globe by some 60 feet, inundating coastal cities and lowlands. That's today. In 1964, Dr. A.T. Wilson of Victoria University in New Zealand expanded Holland's thesis. He said, quote, "The ice ages ended abruptly in such slippages, not only in Antarctica, but also in the Arctic. We feel that the various texts and facts gathered by us justify a conclusion that the deluge, Noah's flood, was the result of such a slippage into the Antarctic waters of billions of tons of ice, bringing an abrupt end to the last age. The sudden event triggered an immense tidal wave. Starting in Antarctic waters, it spread northward toward the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. The abrupt change in temperature must have created violent storms, accompanied by torrents of rain. Moving faster than the waters, the storms, clouds, and darkened skies heralded the avalanche of waters." Now that's a scientist of today. Now I'm going to flip you back 5,000 years. Listen to this Sumerian text. "The moon disappeared. The appearance of the weather changed. The rains roared in the clouds. The winds became savage. The deluge set out. Its might came upon the people like a battle. One person did not see another. They were not recognizable in the destruction. The deluge bellowed like a bull. The winds whinnied like a wild ass. The darkness was dense. The sun could not be seen." And then from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is our oldest epic poem, it tells the dramatic story even to the direction from which the wind blew. Same flood story. "Wind, clouds, and darkness rode before the tidal wave. With the glow of dawn, a black cloud arose from the horizon. Inside it, the god of storms thundered. Everything that had been bright turned to blackness. For one day, the south storm blew," would have to if it came from the Antarctic, "gathering speed as it blew, submerging the mountains." Bible. 6 days and 6 nights blows the wind. As the south storm sweeps the land, water. When the 7th day arrived, the deluge of the south storm subsided. Woo! Now, Sitchin helps us out here with giving us a conclusion. He says the references to the south storm, south wind clearly indicate the direction from which the deluge arrived. It's cloud and winds, the heralds of the storm, moving over hill and plain to reach Mesopotamia. Indeed, a storm and an avalanche of water originating in the Antarctic would reach Mesopotamia via the Indian Ocean after first engulfing the hills of Arabia, then inundating the Tigris-Euphrates plain. The Epic of Gilgamesh also informs us that before the people and their land were submerged, the dams of the dry land and its dikes were torn out. The continental coastlines were overwhelmed and swept over. The biblical version of the deluge story reports that the bursting of the fountains of the great deep preceded the opening of the sluices of heaven. First, the waters of the great deep, what a descriptive name for the southernmost frozen Antarctic seas, broke loose out of their icy confinement. Only then did the rains begin to pour from the skies. This confirmation of our understanding of the deluge is repeated in reverse. When the deluge subsided, the Bible says, first the fountains of the deep were dammed, or stopped. Then the rain was arrested from the skies. After the first immense tidal wave, its waters were still coming and going back in huge waves. Then the waters began going back, the Bible says. And they were less after 150 days, the Bible says. When the ark came to rest between the peaks of Ararat, the avalanche of water, having come from the southern seas, went back to the southern seas. When the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, Genesis 8:2, the ark rested and the waters decreased gradually. The earth, as wet as a newborn baby, rested in the quiet that Lamech had promised Noah 600 years before. The cursed earth had been cleansed of its demonic awfulness, and a new man and a new family was to begin a new civilization. And you know they got a new covenant with the Noahic covenant. The Lord could now bless his people with peace. And I close with Psalm 29, 3 through 11. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thundereth. The Lord is upon many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaketh the cedars. Yea, the Lord breaketh the cedars of Lebanon. He maketh them also to skip like a calf, Lebanon and Syrian like a young unicorn. The voice of the Lord divideth the flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shaketh the wilderness. The Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord maketh the hinds to calve, and discovereth the forest. And in his temple doth everyone speak of his glory. The Lord sitteth upon the flood. Yea, the Lord sitteth king forever. The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. And if you're wondering what that means about the cedars of Lebanon being broken and skipping and the cows calving and so forth, just remember that avalanche of water spreading over that whole area, how it could have happened that way. Glory. Now, in the graphic that I gave you, you can have that. You can take that home. I just want you to remember as you look at it that on the left-hand side is the graphic of the Sumerian story. Don't take that for gospel because it's not gospel, but it is historic. We do know that some power, well, you can call it Nibiru or Marduk or whatever, came down. There was a time when the earth was judged. Was it split in two by another planet? We don't know. Sumerians say so. They said the Nephilim told them it was. Maybe the Nephilim were lying. We don't know. But that's their story. But we do know that the asteroid belt is there, and scientists have forever wondered how the Sam Brown, that thing got there. Strange that in Sumerian and in Hebrew, it means a hammered out bracelet. What's a bracelet? Surrounds the wrist. Asteroid belt surrounds the sun and the first four planets. Ooh, glory. Well, now, tomorrow night we're going to have to take up the subject, partially, of did the Nephilim get through the flood? You'll love that. There are lots of surmises involving DNA, an affair with Ham's wife, other things, even creatures from outer space. Now, this is what's out there. Now, when you eat fish, you eat the meat and throw out the bones. We're not trying to teach you this stuff. Some of it is gospel. Some of it is gospel, and some of it is just what men say. But we will get to the truth in the gospel when it's all said and done. But to remember that the devil started his kingdom a long time ago. He deified man. Nimrod was the first of deified men. Then he died, had a violent death, we're told. Told that his body then was chopped up in pieces by his wife Semiramis and shipped to all the sections of the kingdom. They buried his pieces there, and she did that for a very special reason, demonic, I think. I think her whole plan was demonic, so that she could assume the power by seeding his body. And then she had a son named Tammuz, born after Nimrod was dead, and this son was brought on by immaculate conception, she said, and was now the reincarnated proxy of Nimrod. Hence we have the beginning of the mother-child cultus that comes through every civilization right on up into our world today. And I won't get into where it's at today, but your mind can wander. We ever going to end up in Revelation? Yeah, later, not this time. And it all comes into focus. You can see why I'm writing the book. It's never been written before, never been put together before. Not the beginning or the middle, let alone the end. It's pretty hard to figure out the end. People have trouble with the end. They have trouble with the Omega. They have trouble with the ending. They have trouble with Revelation. No wonder they don't know the Alpha. They don't know the beginning. They don't know the middle. Can't even have a decent sandwich without a middle. Praise the Lord. Well, I'm going to be back at the table as I